Welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of Peter Jackson's latest Hobbit-flavoured big-budget production, The Hobbit The Desolation of Smaug. And somehow it's been a year since I reviewed the first one, and I really don't know where the time went. So apologies for the delay on this one. I really don't have any excuses. I saw this film weeks ago and just haven't got around to reviewing it, so I'm really sorry. It's probably missed the cinemas and I'm a terrible person. So in case you somehow missed this is the second picture in a new Lord of the Rings trilogy based on Tolkien's relatively short children's book, The Hobbit. I'm still not 100% sure that there's a trilogy of material in The Hobbit, but I suspect that there's been some padding from other Tolkien sources. I think Jackson has researched around it and put some more stuff in there, and knowing him, there'll have been hundreds of rewrites of the script. And to his credit, I think Jackson is the man on the planet who is obsessed enough and pernickety enough with the source material to carve a narrative motion picture trilogy out of The Hobbit. He seems to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the source material, and absolutely that's to Jackson's eternal credit. So plot-wise, in case you missed it, in the first one we've got a number of dwarves. They're going back to their abandoned city in search of great wealth and power, and to stick one to the mean old dragon Smaug, who led to their desolation, I suppose, the desolation of Smaug. For me, the dwarven loss of their great city is down to their own greed and hubris, and as such the adventure we have here shows that the dwarves have learned very little from their fall and their time in the wilderness. So I really think they've learned nothing from the arrogance and greed that's laid them so low, and this for me is a problem. I need to stop myself from being too critical on the story because it is a kid's adventure and you sort of have to judge things on their own merits, but at the same time, if I'm spotting things and I think, well, that's not Jackson's fault, because obviously that's in the source material. However, the dwarves really haven't learned anything from what would be a fairly biblical tale of losing stuff because of your own greed and hubris. Here it's sort of, oh, that's all right, we can just get that back, that's no issue at all. I think the biggest problem the film has is inevitably it's going to be compared to Jackson's previous Lord of the Rings Tolkien trilogy, and The Hobbit is supposed to be lighter, and it's inevitable that the comparisons between the Hobbit films and the Lord of the Rings trilogy are not going to be particularly favourable to The Hobbit, no matter how much it might try. So as I said, really the plot for me is problematic, but issues with the second Hobbit inevitably remain from the first film. We're still sitting with those prosthetic noses and the slapstick dwarves, and all that stuff is right next to the talk of the end of the world being brought around by this great darkness. It's perhaps not impossible to make those two things mesh, but for me, as with the first film, I feel like those two things never reconcile themselves. And again, the dwarf king hero type character who is leading the dwarf expedition is a cross between Aragorn and from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Gowron from Star Trek. Last year I actually put a picture in my review of the two. Here's Aragorn, here's Gowron, and here's this guy. But I'm not going to do that now because I'm so incredibly professional. So, like with the first Hobbit film, having said all that, basically saying fundamentally I don't think the film works. That does not mean that there's not really good stuff in here. It's just that altogether it doesn't work. So if you sort of pick and choose the bits you like, I think there's enough in there to justify going to see this film. Firstly, Martin Freeman is excellent as Bilbo, and in general the cast do a fine job. The individual dwarves here are by and large caricatures again, and they don't have distinct personalities, so they're very interchangeable. Having said that, the ones which are fleshed out a bit more, I find that the majority of them either don't fit into this film or they aren't very interesting. Again, we're back to that. Does this film want to be like The Lord of the Rings? Does it want a more mature subject matter? Do we want to worry about Sauron plotting to conquer and destroy, or are we happy to have a kids' film featuring dwarves with funny prosthetic noses and have a bit of a giggle with their slapstick antics? They're on a quest to get stuff. As I've said before, those two things don't mesh. I thought in the first film one of the real standouts, as it should be, was Bilbo's riddle game with Gollum. But unfortunately here the sort of equivalent battle of wits is between Bilbo and Smaug the dragon, and that for me falls utterly flat. I think every time that the dragon is on screen and not just destroying stuff, it doesn't work at all, but I'll get on to that. I am sounding negative about this film, but despite what I consider to be pretty fundamental problems with the film, and again it's far longer than the source material would lead me to suggest. I still recommend that you see this film, and if you don't see it in the cinema because I've been too late with the review, catch it on Blu-ray and definitely get Blu-ray rather than DVD. On top of the fine acting, Jackson has a wonderful understanding of what makes mild peril exciting, and some of the set pieces in this film are as good as I've ever seen. Honestly, some of them are absolutely breathtaking, especially seeing it on the big screen. For me, the real standout was the barrel scene when the dwarves are all in barrels trying to escape down a river. It was absolutely exceptional, it really was. I was riveted. Common sense goes out the window, but it was just a thrill ride. So we can talk about Jackson's direction, the cinematography, all that stuff, like in The Lord of the Rings, is absolutely breathtaking and fantastic. You can say that maybe he's a bit overly fussy, you can say that some of the narrative scenes chug along, all that stuff remains. But I basically cherry-pick the bits out of the film I like from this sort of huge buffet of different stuff. So there's sort of Italian over there, Chinese over there, it's all completely random. And I like the political stuff between the people of Lake Town and the elves. I like the sort of murmurings of revolution, of economic stagnation. I like the creeping threat of the orcs and goblins, and I especially like the stuff about the machinations of Sauron. It's the adult stuff that I like. It's just that the dwarves and the dragon don't work for me. Those bits don't work, and I'm sure there will be other people that don't have any interest in the political aspects of the film. They just want a rip-roaring adventure film, and that's there as well. For me, the big clanger was the talking dragon. That just didn't work for me in any way at all, really. I didn't find it compelling. I thought it was silly. Just didn't work. All right, it's high fantasy, but I'm sorry, it just didn't work. So, after saying all that, and most of what I said was negative, this film is recommended. I understand that there'll be some confusion over the comments I've made, but hopefully you'll go in and you'll see this film, because there's enough in there for me to suggest you will appreciate what's good about this film, and that in itself is enough to justify seeing it. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.